Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to our first webinar in the Kpler Risk and Compliance series. We're thrilled to have so many of you join us today. My name is John Charles Gordon. I'll be your host today. I'm the Ship Tracking Director for Kpler, and I'm joined by our two risk and compliance experts here on the call. We have Dimitris Ampazidis. He is our Risk and Compliance Analyst. His experience ranges across the board from one of the leading classification societies, Lloyd's Register, where he was responsible for risk and compliance evaluations for Lloyd's Register, and joins us here at Kpler today. And we also have Kevin Kinney. Kevin Kinney joins us from the US Department of Homeland Security, where he spent 21 years within the department, finishing off his career there as Section Chief for the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force at the Fusion Center. And Kevin joins Kpler as our US National Security Liaison Officer. So today, where we have our experts joining us, we will also be talking about the first webinar of its kind here at Kpler, where we're deep diving into the current state of compliance in shipping. We'll be talking about the sanctioned fleet, the grey fleet, the dark fleet. We'll also be talking about the different advanced technologies that we are putting into practice, where we're detecting AIS gaps, high-risk ship-to-ship transfers, as well as AI spoofing. And finally, we'll be leveraging that data for risk management, and we're going to be taking you through a few examples of some of the vessels that we have selected for you today. And then we'll be finalizing with a Q&A. So please feel free to use the Q&A chat section, where you can enter any questions you may have. And if we see that some of your questions are pertinent to a particular slide that we're presenting, we will pick those up as and when they come in. But without further ado, I will hand over the presentation to Dimitris.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Dimitris Ampazidis. I am the Risk and Compliance Analyst at Kpler, based in Athens, Greece. Thank you all for joining us today, and let's dive deeper into the current state of compliance in shipping. And we will start by reviewing together the total figures for the white, grey, dark, and the sanctioned fleet categories. This will help us gain a better understanding of the existing compliance landscape. So let's begin with the sanctioned fleet. These are vessels that are either directly sanctioned or have companies in their 6-layer ownership structure that are included in the sanctions list published by OFAC, the UK, the EU, and the UN. And next, we do have the dark vessels. These are ships that have had an ice gap which exceeds the 48 hours, along with the change in the drafts. They may also be linked to ice spoofing events or involved in sanction trade from countries like Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, and the others. And finally, we come to the grey category, the most complex one, the most tricky one. This category includes vessels connected to trade between Russia and the EU, UK, or USA. It also covers vessels linked to sanctioned cargo through high-risk port calls or ship-to-ship transfers, and those with AIS gaps exceeding 48 hours without a change in the draft. Of course, if our vessel is not belonged to any of this category, it's a white one. Let's go now to see how many vessels we do have in each category and gain a better understanding on what we are talking about. First, I want to mention that these figures are based on the vessels in the Kpler platform universe, including all oil, chemicals, LNG, LPG, and dry vessels over 5,000 tonnages. As we can see, approximately 75% of these vessels are categorized as white, meaning that there are no compliance risks associated with them. However, this leaves 1 in 4 vessels that requires our close attention, that we have to be able to monitor what they have been doing over the past few years and all the trades that are engaged with. Moving in the opposite direction, we can see that over 500 vessels are either sanctioned themselves or have sanctioned owners. This means that there are more than 5,000 vessels operating under strict regulations. Lastly, we have more than 10,000 vessels globally that have shown at least one risk factor since 1st of January 2022. These risk factors are significant enough to place them in the gray or dark categories. This clearly shows how risk parameters impact risk categorization. Moving forward, we can see that only a small percentage of vessels globally, approximately 2%, have gains in trade with risks. From the pie chart on the right, we can observe that 75% approximately of these cases involve trade with Russian cargo. This cargo is not fully sanctioned, but instead has many restrictions concerning the price, which has been purchased, the location, and the way the trade taken place, based, of course, on the active price cap regulation. It is always interesting to better understand the identity of these vessels. Here, we have highlighted the distribution for the top 10 ISM manager countries. Naturally, we expect the Greek and Chinese fleets to be at the top due to the large volume of vessels that they operate. However, the most critical element here is the percentage of non-white vessels for each country. We can see that fleets from China, India, Hong Kong, the United Arab Emirates, and South Korea have almost half of their vessels involved in situations such as ice gaps, spoofing, and other high-risk activities. Notably, only companies from the United Arab Emirates are identified as ISM manager for vessels included in the sanctioned fleet category. This highlights a significant compliance risk associated with their operations. Now, if we delve deeper and examine specific vessel owners, we notice some interesting patterns. For example, companies from Iran operate a fully sanctioned fleet. This means that every vessel under their control is subject to sanctions, making them a significant point of concern. On the other hand, there are major players in the maritime industry with a considerable number of vessels engaged in potentially risk activities, such as ice gaps. These gaps indicate periods when a vessel's tracking system is turned off, often to hide illegal activities or to avoid detection in high-risk areas. Understanding these patterns help us identify which fleet and owners pose higher risks. We can see that monitoring ice gaps and other suspicious behaviors is crucial in compliance and risk management. Kevin, would you like to take over from here and provide more insights on how we can effectively identify these cases?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Demetrius. I appreciate your intro. As Demetrius explained, we have different techniques that we utilize at Kpler to identify these sanctioned vessels and vessels that we want to take a bigger, deeper look at. So when we get into advanced technology compliance, and we move to the next slide, thank you. We look at things such as the AIS gaps, the high-risk ship-to-ship transfers, high-risk port calls, and AIS spoofing. And there's certain things that we do specifically with Kpler that really helps us dial or dig deeper into this and identify ships that we really feel are high risk. And when we're looking at AIS gaps, one thing I want to highlight is that there's no AIS signal for over 20 hours and no AIS network coverage. So that will give us an amber flag. So when we look at that, the other thing I want to bring back is Demetrius spoke about the 48 hours with the dark vessels when there's a gap with the AIS signal. We move to high-risk ship-to-ship transfers, and these are going to be things that we look at that are very suspicious. And one thing I want to bring to note that a lot of folks I've spoke with in the past think that all ship-to-ship transfers are high risk or that they are something that we need to really flag. And that is not the case. A lot of times, these are part of the normal day-to-day operations. So these are things that we really look at, we dig deeper into before we go ahead and say that this is a high risk. And we're going to be looking at sanctioned vessels or transferring sanctioned cargo and sanctioned owners when we go ahead and say that something has a high-risk ship-to-ship transfer. We look at high-risk port calls. These are going to be generally port calls that are done in Iran, Syria, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, and Russian-occupied Ukrainian territory. And then the last would be AIS spoofing. And we predict the vessel position, and we predict where it's at. and we compare it versus to the actual AIS position, because if you've been in this world, you notice that a lot of times some of our vessels that are trying to avoid detection sometimes are in dry land. So with this, we're able to use our networks, our data, our information to really pinpoint where the vessel is and identify AIS spoofing. All right. Next slide. All right, as we get into different case studies, and we're looking at different vessels that have really come to our attention. One of them would be the AIS gaps that we see in the SFL Panther. And as we're looking at the SFL Panther, we see that it's a crude oil tanker, and the flag they're flying is from Marshall Islands, and it was built in 2015. But as we're looking at it, you can see on our data the little dots, and that will show where we didn't have direct data and there might be gaps in AIS. We also look at the location of where the ship is at, and if we've seen AIS spoofing or gaps in those areas. But then one thing that we really hound or dig deep into is the draft change. So we can tell that something happened along this route. So that's where we are able to determine that there was an AIS gap, and we're able to pinpoint and make the travel of this vessel. We can highlight it, and we're more accurate with our information. All right, next. All right, and then when we get to the Gas Olympia, it's a Liberian flag LPG tanker, and it was built in 2003. And as we see, let's see, we can see that we have different things with this, and we have a high-risk ship-to-ship transfer. When you go into Kpler's database, you're going to see the different things, and one of the biggest things that comes up is going to be the cargo, and it shows that this vessel has transported sanctioned cargo in the past. And then one thing I want to bring up with our databases are going to be the hyperlinks. And if you look at this slide, you're going to see the OFAC, OFSI, and the EU tabs. And when we get later into our presentation, we'll be able to show you how important that is, and one of the great things that our system is able to do by taking you directly to those websites and giving you the information just by a click of a button. But what we get to is you look at the operational risks, and it comes down, and you're going to see that this has had this vessel has had high-risk ship-to-ship transfers with these 3 different vessels, and you're going to see the amount in the volume and the draft that has changed with this vessel. So those are all things that all playing together with our information and how we determine that this was a high-risk ship-to-ship transfer. Okay. Now this is the big one, and a lot of people always ask questions about AIS spoofing. We're going to look at the Tippy Gold, and one thing that we're going to see is the location where this has occurred. There's in this location there's been multiple acts of AIS spoofing in the past, but we're going to look at the different risks that this ship presents. We've got different sanctions risk where it was carrying fuel from Russia. We're also looking at the management risks and the operational risk. But you're going to see that we have a lot of data that shows that this vessel is not where it was supposed to be, or it was trying to possibly hide where it was at while it was transferring the different sanctioned fuel. So as we move from that, we're going to go to the next slide, and I'll turn that back over to you, Demetrius.
Perfect. Thanks, Kevin. So let's have a look now on what we can export by analyzing the crude flows over the time. First of all, let's look at the graph, which uses Kpler data on cargo and flows to show the distribution of Russian crude flows from January 2021 till May 2024. We can observe a slight increase in the total volume of trading over the last few months. However, it is important to note the significant changes since December 2023. Following actions taken by the EU, there has been a noticeable decline in the number of sanctioned vessels involved in transferring Russian cargo. This reduction reflects the impact of the EU measures on shipping and trade compliance. By analyzing this data, we can better understand the trends and shifts in the market, which help us stay informed and make more strategic decisions in managing risks and compliance in maritime operations. In the second graph, we can see the liquids exports from Venezuela, which is categorized by vessel owner origin. Interestingly, this hasn't been a decline in the total exports from Venezuela, as you can see. Between October 2023 and May 2024, the US government eased sanctions on Venezuela. This policy change explains why we do have an increase in ISM managers from Greece, Japan, and the USA, as these countries took advantage of the relaxed restrictions. Simultaneously, we observe a decline in vessels with unknown ISM management. This alteration is highlighting the importance of having accurate and updated information on vessels ownership, since there is a direct connection in between having an unknown manager and being engaged in such a trade. These shifts highlight how geopolitical actions and policy changes directly impact the maritime industry. As you can see, after the ease of the sanctions, we do have an incline, and after the reimpose of sanctions, we start having a decline on the flows. So this is extremely important to monitor all these changes. Now, let's look at the first case that we prepared, which involves a recently sanctioned vessel by OFAC due to its connections to the Houthis. The vessel in question is a 23 years old VLCC, flagged in Panama. Since November 2023, its ISM manager has been based in Singapore, while the register owner and commercial managers are based in Turkey. The vessel is classified by an Ajax member at that point of time, Lloyd's Register, but there is no information available regarding its P&I coverage. Despite this, the vessel's port state control history is clean, with no detentions or bans. On the 10th of June 2024, this vessel was sanctioned by OFAC, by the US government. This case highlights the complexities and challenges in monitoring and managing maritime compliance, especially with vessels that may appear compliant on the surface but have underlying issues. So let's discover all these issues. As you can see from the OFAC website, as Kevin previously told, it is extremely important to have access to the direct information which came from the real source. The sanction has been active since the 10th of June 2024 due to the vessel support of the Houthis. While sanctions are often the result of political activities and can be difficult to predict, it is possible to categorize vessels based on their operational patterns and historical data from other sanction cases. So let's explore what a compliance analyst could have identified about this vessel before the sanction was imposed. As you can see from the panel on the left, it was possible to identify at least 5 risk parameters for Bella before the sanction was applied. Firstly, Bella transferred Iranian dirty products within the last 24 months, dating back to the 1st of January 2022. This significant red flag indicates the vessel's engagement with sanctioned cargo. Secondly, Bella had no coverage from any non-P&I club, which is rational given its involvement with Iranian cargo. This lack of coverage is a critical risk factor as it suggests potential issues with liability and insurance. When it comes to operational risks, Bella conducted 5 high-risk ship-to-ship transfers and made port calls in Venezuela as well. High-risk ship-to-ship transfers involve the exchange of cargo between vessels, which can be used to obscure the origin and destination of sanctioned goods. Port calls in Venezuela are particularly concerning given the country's geopolitical situation and associated sanctions. Additionally, Bella's ISM manager was based in Singapore since November 2023, while its register and commercial managers were based in Turkey. This international management structure can sometimes complicate compliance efforts, as different jurisdictions have varying regulations and enforcement mechanisms. Identifying these risk factors early could have provided valuable insights and potentially predict the sanction. This case underscores the importance of thorough and continuous monitoring in maritime compliance, leveraging both operational patterns and historical data to mitigate risks effectively. At the end, from intelligence that we received from our partners using satellite images, we have found that Bella, at the end of March, while her IIS is implying she's empty, the shadow comparison from her satellite imagery shows a considerably thinner shadow. The estimation is about 2 million barrels of Iranian crude. Such techniques are quite common among vessels with such pattern of trading, and is critical as an industry to have our eyes open on these cases. As we can see on the first table, out of the 5 high-risk ship-to-ship transfers, one involved a sanctioned vessel named Hawk in January 2023. Additionally, a few months later, in May, Bella called at the port of Jose in Venezuela and loaded cargo as well. By combining all these data, we can categorize Bella as part of the grey fleet. This indicates significant risk factors but not an immediate sanction status. While it is challenging to predict the exact actions of government officials regarding sanctions and jurisdictions, it is entirely feasible to use ownership data, operational insights, and intelligence for risk assessment and due diligence. Having this information allows us to identify and mitigate potential risks effectively. Given all the risk parameters Bella presented, it is clear that this vessel would be considered high risk for engagement, even months before OFAC imposed the sanction. Kevin, the floor is yours for the second case.
All right, thank you very much, Demetrius. I appreciate it. So the second vessel that we're going to look at is going to be the Janet. One thing I want to bring to note is that as we're talking about these vessels, one of the big things that happens as they move through sanctions or if they become a target of an investigation, they'll try to change the P&I coverage, the classification will change, and even the name of the vessel. So as of end of June, beginning of July, the Janet changed its name to Quinn. It also has moved from a Saudi Arabia flagged vessel to I believe the Janet is a Panamanian flagged vessel at this point. So these are all things to try to stay in the good graces of the community to keep shipping and keep making money. So as we look at the backstory, just like we did for the Bella, we're going to see that this was a Saudi Arabia flagged vessel. It's a 24-year-old vessel. It's managed from Hong Kong and is classified by DNV. And P&I coverage comes from Britannia steamship. And there was no detentions or bannings from PCS MOUs. So we have a really good looking ship. It looks like it's moving along fine. So investigations show, and you can move to the next slide. When we get to June 10th of 2024, this ship fell under sanctions from OFAC. And when you dig into this, like I mentioned before, there's a tab that you can go and it will take you to the OFAC page. One thing when you read into why this was actually sanctioned, I believe that this was tied to money laundering and different investigative activities that all led back to providing material and support to the Houthis. So this is all going to be helpful information as you're moving forward in your investigation towards a seizure or to taking moving towards these criminal organizations. All this information that you have as far as past ownership, insurance, classifications, these are all going to be things that are useful as you're building your investigation or targeting these entities that are trying to avoid sanctions or tried to avoid detection as they're supporting these terrorist organizations. If we move next. All right, so as we look at the Janet, now Quinn, we're going to see that as of before the sanction, we had different risk, and it was the vessel had been related to sanctions, and that it had transported sanctioned cargo in the last 24 months. And this is what you will get when you go to terminal and you're able to go into our compliance tab and you're able to pull up and it gives you the information so that you can see what is going on with this vessel and you can make a determination on your own of what you need to look out for and what this vessel may be doing as you're preparing to work with it or go after information or pull information on these. It had sanction risk. It transferred sanctioned cargo within the last 30 days, and it was Iranian dirty products. And the operational risk, we have 2 high-risk AIS gaps. And then as we move to the next slide, we're going to see the risk to detect before the sanction. The AIS gap near the Philippines lasted about 23 hours, and there were draft changes, like we'd mentioned before. And that was near Taiwan. And like we said, a lot of times this happens in well-known areas for ship-to-ship transfers, and they'll turn off AIS so that they can move about undetected. But we're able to see the draft changes. And then we look to see where these vessels are located before we go ahead and make this determination. But this vessel came back, like we said before, as a vessel that the ownership and the folks working with it were providing material support to the Houthis. And with that, I want to thank you for your time. And JC, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Dimitris. Right on time. And actually, we have a lot of questions coming in from the audience, which is great. So we'll take some time now. We've got about 10, 15 minutes left on the webinar to answer these questions in a bit more detail. But just so in terms of our contact details, you can see them all here. We'd be delighted to answer any questions in writing as well. So please take note of these email addresses, and we will get back to you in writing if there are some more specific questions you would like to answer us that you don't have time to do so in the chat. But yeah, there are quite a few questions. So let me just go through the Q&A here, and I will just start from top to bottom. So we have Orestes. Orestes, thank you so much for your questions. You have quite a few there, but we're going to go through some of these. So one of the questions here is dealing with Russia. Vessels moving Russian cargo under the price cap should not be considered as being a grey vessel. How does Kpler ensure and capture this? So there are two things, and this is how maybe Dimitris or Kevin, you can bring up the platform just to give some examples of potentially some of these trades from Russia. We have two sections within the application. We show the cargo tab, where we will give you the details about the cargo, the volumes, and the origin and destination. So the cargo can be flagged as being a sanctioned cargo. However, we also have a tab called trade, and that is where we essentially map out all the trades against the different sanction programs. For example, that would show up as green, but if it was Russia going to the EU, for example, or the UK, we would show that as amber. We wouldn't show it as red, because that's quite a good point. If we don't have the purchase price available, we're not going to assume it is a sanctioned trade. We're just going to highlight it as an amber risk to say that the trade has gone to one of the G7 countries that has imposed sanctions upon this trade. And so we would recommend that you do further due diligence on this particular matter. We won't always have every single bit of information on the pricing of these different trades. So we would, as a precautionary approach, we tag them as amber, and we mention that there is further due diligence to be had. So hopefully that answers your first question. If it doesn't, please reach out by email, and we'll be happy to provide you with more information. There is a follow-up, 2 questions from Orestes, and I'll just tackle these here as well. So in terms of the Venezuelan exports, question was that we trust that Kpler accounted for the period of sanction relief and wind down period within the Venezuelan export sanction, and that's correct. So we have time stamped the various sanction program for Venezuela, where we have tagged the trades that occurred before and after the wind down period, or the sanction relief period, and that is then shown on our data, on our platform, on our APIs, that those trades were either green or raised as amber or red. So yes, time period is taken into account. And then a final question here from Orestes was around, do you have similar data for LNG vessels? The question is yes. The answer is yes, that we do. We have information about all the LNG fleet, and actually, Dimitris, maybe you can share your screen and show the platform, and where you can quickly filter by the market. You can filter by LNG vessels, and we have been noticing an increased activity in secondhand sales to the UAE, and this would show up in our data with the change of ownership. So ownership changes, flag changes, name changes are all part of the information set that we provide our customers when looking at, in terms of the due diligence processes, looking at the history of the vessel and and how it's been operating and who it's been managed by. So here you can see on the platform, we have some tabs at the top there where you can just quickly filter by LNG vessels and subsequently look at do a deeper dive into each of these vessels. We also have an explore tool where you can kind of filter and look for vessel names, owners, and you'll be able to see the latest information there. So yeah, but again, if you have some, we can certainly give you some more examples of this data in writing. Okay, there are quite a few questions, so I will try and answer everyone fairly. We have Mikhail. Mikhail is asking a question around the BMP5. So for those that don't know, the BMP5, it actually stands for a security essentially recommendation. So it's the best management practices to deter piracy and enhance maritime security in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, Indian Ocean, and the Arabian Sea. And one of the recommendations from BMP5 is to have AIS transmitting on at all times. And when the vessel is not transmitting on AIS, this is a suspicious activity, according to the BMP5. And the question was, when vessels go through high-risk areas, certain insurers maybe, through their insurance policies, prompt the owner or operator to switch off their AIS. And the question is, would this be considered as dark activity by Kpler? So yes, in terms of the definition of dark activity, we would highlight this within that. So having an AIS gap, sort of a deliberate AIS gap, even though we have good AIS coverage in that area, we see lots of other vessels on AIS, and we know that this particular vessel here has turned off their AIS, we would just highlight that as an amber risk and highlight it as a risky gap. So this would be, again, for your due diligence purposes, having a record of that gap is important for all stakeholders involved. Now, if the insurance company has requested this, and then you can then continue and verify that information with the insurer, the vessel owner's insurer, and their policy, then you can rest assured that this was an intentional operational activity. But we do have insurers and their policies that stipulate the exact opposite. We have insurers that actually state that you should have AIS on at all times. And especially when insurance companies are evaluating the vessel's operations against their policies and premiums. So if vessels, for example, do not have a war risk premium against their policy, but are actually operating in high risk areas or war risk areas, this would nullify, for example, some of their policies. So we do want to make sure that we're giving the accurate data to everyone involved, and then it's up to customers to do additional due diligence and contact the relevant parties to confirm if this was accurate. So that hopefully, Mikhail, answers your question. And again, very happy to provide further written response there. Okay, going down to Gerard. Gerard has a question around data standards and registers that Kpler use. First question is the IMO identification number for ships. Essentially, where do you get your data? We get our data from multiple sources. These sources the primary source is from our global AIS network. So because Kpler owned the largest AIS network in the world, since the acquisition of Marine Traffic and Fleetmon, we've consolidated this very large radio network of over 7,000 AIS stations in the world. We are able to capture the information transmitted by these AIS transmitters. And within those messages, there is an IMO number. So that is our first bit of information that we have. We then have multiple sources, both open public information sources and commercial sources that we have partnerships with. And those are sources that then validate the AIS message. So if there is a potential conflict of information, this would highlight in our database, but most of the time, in a lot of cases, the AIS and the other sources will cross-verify the IMO number and confirm the IMO number. So before adding a vessel into our database, let's say a brand new vessel with an IMO number, we do need to have at least 2 sources confirming the IMO number. So that's the first bit of the question. And the second bit is, do you use the ISO 14772 legal entity identifier? The answer very simply is no. We do not use this LEI identifier yet, but I see that there are some recommendations to start using the LEI for cross-border payments and AML, CFT, etc. So we'll certainly look at that and see if we can integrate some of that information there for this ISO standard. We're very keen to incorporate further data sets as we progress and evolve the product with customer feedback. Okay, so scrolling down, I'm just conscious of time. We've got about 7-8 minutes left, so I'll try and run through these, make sure I can answer as many people as I can. Eunice, thank you for the great presentation. Thank you very much. What kind of data allows us to track a vessel that changed its name or flag? Quite simply, very similar answer to the previous one. So AIS data would allow us and indicate a name change, flag change. The reason being is that when you transmit on AIS, you have to enter a particular set of codes, standards, all linked to your MMSI number. The MMSI number is essentially a maritime mobile service identity number, and that is given to you by the radio authority of the flag registry. So, for example, if you're flagged to Panama, Panama will have a set of MMSIs, and they will allocate one for your vessel. As soon as a vessel changes flag, they will have a new MMSI number. And so those changes are then reflected in the AIS data. And then we confirm or refute that with further data sources to corroborate that. So with our open public information sources and private sources, commercial sources as well. Same goes for names, same goes for ownership. We get information from multiple sources to corroborate and highlight those changes. Anatoly asks somewhat of a similar question. How often do you update information about a ship's commercial manager or registered owner or ISM manager and flags? Because, for example, the tanker Janet from the 1st of June has had the name, has had a flag change. It's now called Quinn. Yes, exactly. So this is what we were mentioning. This is what Kevin was mentioning. When we created this presentation, we wanted to highlight the historical facts at the time and making sure that we were showing Janet as Janet because that's how OFAC had sanctioned it. But yes, indeed, the vessel has now changed its name, and we do show that already on the platform there. So yeah, so these information changes happen on a daily basis for notably for, well, if you're looking at the sanction list, we scan those every day. So there's an update at 1 a.m. UTC on the platform, and you will get the latest information on sanctioned vessels. For name change, flag change, ownership change, these there is a bit of a lag. So we do need to corroborate before we make those changes on the database. Can vary from several days to several weeks, but in essence, if we have more market information, more people contacting us and telling us that there are certain changes in the market that we may have not picked up from our different sources, we can then also review this information and manually update it if we have enough evidence to do so. Okay, Ali, how is the draft recorded by Kpler? The draft data is actually captured by AIS. So it is a information source that we get from the AIS transmitters, and these transmissions produce the draft data. Important thing to note, though, is that the draft message is actually manually updated by the captain. So the captain on board will actually manually enter the draft value. So there can be a delay, there can be a lag of draft change, which is why when we have an AIS gap, we look further into the future after the gap has occurred to see if the draft change value, if the draft has a value change, which we can then link back to the gap. So we know, for example, what draft value the vessel was transmitting before the gap, and then what draft value it was transmitting after the gap. And if there's a delta, if there's a change, that could signify potentially a dark loading or discharging event. And the reason why, the deceptive shipping practices in general, we see this quite often, draft change after an AIS gap. So this is a crucial data point that we use. Okay, so we've got a few more questions. Looking at Anatoly, that's the second question here. So thanks for the information. I have the following question. Do you provide P&I information on tanker insurance? Interested in information about insurance, which is different from the international group of P&I. So yes, indeed. There are so the international group of P&I publicly, openly display P&I coverage of their fleets. This is information that we capture and we record. There are some smaller P&I insurance companies that provide some data that are not part of IG P&I, but it is true that sometimes the information is very difficult to get our hands on when they are not part of the international group. So if we don't have that data, we, as a precaution, would show that there is missing P&I information, and this will highlight as an amber risk. So it's not a sanction risk or anything. It's just highlighting that further due diligence is necessary. So we recommend that our customers utilize this information to then ask more questions within their sort of supply chain. Okay, another question around the future of the product from Alessio asking, will you implement satellite imagery coverage to detect dark STS transfers? I think it's an interesting possibility that we will integrate more data sources. So there is satellite imagery, there is synthetic aperture radar that we could also look into, RF detection sources. So yes, the answer is there are multiple signal intelligence and human intelligence sources that we can integrate and build into the product over time. Right now, we base a lot of our information from AIS and from our global sources and human intelligence sources in the market from various sources that we have built over a decade now at Kpler. So the different market participants plus AIS plus human intelligence provide us all this information, and we're able to create a picture, an intelligence picture for our customers. But of course, adding further data sources is always something that we're looking into. So satellite imagery is most likely a yes in the future. Okay, let me just see. We've got a few more questions here. And Dimitris, Kevin, please do jump in if you feel like there are some ones you can answer here. So will the recording of the webinar be made available? Yes, it will. We will send participants a link to that, and we'll be able to share that with you after. And I think we'll do one more question here before the end of the webinar. Let's have a look.
I think, JC, if I can take it
sure.
from here, I find the question from Win Jiao, which is asking about to make a clear definition about the sanction cargo, and also what is the predicted IEs and our approach and methodology on that. So sanction cargo for Kpler and for our system is every cargo that has on it any active sanctions placed by OFAC, UK, EU, or UN. So we are talking about Iranian crude, Russian oil if it is above the price cap, and Venezuela, North Korea, and all the others. And about the second part of that question about the predicted IEs, I suspect that this is about our methodology, our machine learning algorithms that we are doing in order to estimate the potential IE spoofing events. So at any given time, based on the ice signal that we receive for each vessel, we make a prediction for the next signal that we will receive about the draft, about the position and all that characteristics that are connecting to ice. And if we do have a difference, we flagged that thing as potentially ice spoofing event. And then we do have a whole team of analysts that are reviewing all these cases and trying to examine if this is because of broken down of the failure on ice terminal, or about because of the signal, or if it is a case that the vessel has been doing something specific with the ice signal. So this is our methodology when it comes to the ice spoofing and the predict ice. Back to you, JC.
Thanks, Dimitris. Look, thank you very much for attending today. Everyone who has answered a question, we will get back to in writing. So don't feel left out if we haven't, if we didn't manage to get to you today. We will follow up in writing, and then we can continue these conversations over email. But I would like to thank everyone today for attending, and hopefully this has been enlightening, useful, and we look forward to continuing this webinar series in the future, and we'll make sure to invite you all for round 2. And with that, I'd like to wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you very much.